Welcome back to New Day Northwest. In his rant online, the suspect of the mass Buffalo shooting repeatedly cited the false Great Replacement theory, which suggests Jewish elites are bringing people of color into the U.S. to replace whites. So I talked with Carroll Rivas from the Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project. It's a group that monitors hate groups throughout the country, including 19 right here in Washington state.
You know, this particular theory is really rooted in, unfortunately, a long history of this idea of white displacement. The terminology, I think, really we're talking about a dozen years, and about the last, 7 years where there has been specific acts of violence referencing this term. But that, it's rooted in this really old conspiracy, this false conspiracy, and this white supremacist idea that's been around for, decades and decades and decades.
So can you kind of explain the main idea of this theory to us?
The false white supremacist Great Replacement theory is this idea that there are nefarious actors, usually Jewish people, sometimes Democrats being manipulated by Jewish people, that are purposely manipulating the demographics of the United States through immigration to replace white people with people of color, and then to gain political power by doing that. This is not true. It is a false idea. And unfortunately, again, it's rooted in anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and continues to be spread by people in leadership positions, media pundits, politicians, and sometimes by folks who I think don't know that they're being manipulated into spreading this lie.
I like that every time that you've mentioned this, you've made sure to, before saying this theory, the false replacement theory. Yeah. Was the young man who was accused in the Buffalo shooting, was he part of a specific group that may have been on your radar?
Yeah, at this time, we're not aware of a specific group that he was involved in, but that's sort of the challenge of how these movements work, right? Especially when an idea like this becomes so common and repeated in the deep, dark circles of the internet, in the spaces on the internet that are accessible to youth and gaming, in our political pundits and our elected officials. When it's coming at folks from all those directions, those access points are everywhere. And so it seems like, from what we know, that this accused perpetrator is someone who really was bombarded with this message in many, many ways, particularly online, and then acted on it because, unfortunately, they were very heavily armed and could plan out and then inflict mass violence.
And it seems at this point he acted alone in this. How are these lone wolves, if you will, being radicalized, and how are the messages spreading? You talked about the deep, dark corners of the web.
Yeah. And I think, that's a really interesting term to point out too. For a long time, we did refer to people who kind of on an individual basis acted in violence in a moment as lone wolves. But actually that terminology comes from a 1980s white supremacist leader who actually had a strategy of using these ideas and spreading them so wide that you would actually have individuals act and wouldn't be able to place blame on the folks who have perpetrated the ideas in the first place, who had purposely planted them in these minds. So we actually try to kind of move away from that term because it takes the blame off of the fact that there were people pushing this out there. In this case, it does look like the accused perpetrator was in a lot of online spaces, regular spaces that people engage in, like Reddit, then Discord, and was getting this information. But there were warning signs in their life as well. And we hope that people start to think about what those are and interrupt.
There's never going to be a time when we all have the same ideologies. We all think the same way. But at some point, we have to kind of understand where the line is drawn. How do we get into the education for people who may be growing up with this ideology or being told this their whole lives? How do you change that course?
This is not easy stuff, right? We're talking about really complex and historical things that have gone on for a long time. So maybe first, right, let's really talk about our history. So that's number one. I think inclusive and true history is important because that's how we learn. But then I think the other piece really is that these are powerful ideas, these hard right, false conspiracies, because they offer simple answers to complex questions and they scapegoat people. And we actually have powerful ideas about how our world is not a zero-sum game. We can all thrive. Actually, there is an opportunity for all of us to be better together, and that's powerful. So we have to both, talk about the falsity in what we hear, but also offer powerful ideas, because
Yes.
I actually think we all want to be able to thrive together.
And thanks to her for that thoughtful discussion.